Mommy's going to be right back, baby. Stay hidden and don't make a sound. Salma Morgan pressed her 18-month-old son deeper into the bedroom closet, her hands shaking as she kissed his forehead. Little James whimpered softly, sensing his mother's terror, but she couldn't comfort him now. Not with her husband's blood still wet on her hands and the sound of footsteps moving through their house. "I know you're in here, Mrs. Morgan." The voice was calm, almost conversational. "Your husband is dead. Your son doesn't have to be." She crept toward the bedroom door, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. Through the crack, she could see into the living room where the remnants of their second wedding anniversary celebration lay scattered. Overturned champagne glasses, the anniversary cake smashed on the floor, and Thomas, her brilliant, loving Thomas, lying motionless in a pool of blood. "All you have to do is tell me where he hid the files." The killer was methodically searching their home, pulling out drawers, overturning furniture. He was looking for something specific, something important enough to murder for. "What files?" she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't play games, Salma. Thomas told you about Geneva before he died." "I heard him." Geneva. The word meant nothing to her, but Thomas had whispered something as he lay dying in her arms. She'd been too shocked, too desperate to save him, to understand what he was trying to tell her. The footsteps were getting closer to the bedroom. In the closet, James made a small sound, not quite a cry, but enough to make her heart stop. She had to lead the killer away from her son. "The files aren't here," she lied, stepping into the hallway. The man turned toward her, and she got her first clear look at his face. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, with cold blue eyes and the kind of casual demeanor that suggested killing came easily to him. "Hello, Salma. I'm sorry about Thomas. He was a good man who made some very bad choices." "What did he do?" "He tried to be a hero. Heroes have a tendency to die young." The killer's smile was almost sympathetic. "The question now is whether you want to join him or raise your son." From somewhere in the house came the wail of sirens. Neighbors must have heard the gunshot and called 911. The killer's expression tightened with annoyance. "Time's running short. The files, Salma. Where are they?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Then you're useless to me." He raised his gun, and Salma closed her eyes, thinking about James hidden in the closet, about Thomas bleeding out on their living room floor, about the life they'd built together that was ending in violence and chaos. The front door exploded inward as police officers flooded the house, shouting commands. The killer's attention shifted for just a moment, and Salma threw herself sideways into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Shots fired. Suspect in the house. She could hear the killer running, hear officers pursuing him through her home. Glass shattered somewhere, probably the kitchen window, and then there were more shouts, the sound of a struggle, and finally silence. "Hey, my friend. Hope you're doing well. Drop a comment and let me know how you're feeling about this story so far and where you are watching from. Some stories are too close to my heart to share on YouTube. I send those, along with little life lessons and surprises, to my email circle. If you'd like to be part of it, you can join with the link in the description." Salma crawled to the closet and pulled James into her arms, holding him tight as he cried. She was alive. Her son was alive. But Thomas was gone, and everything she thought she knew about their life together was about to be torn apart. When the police finally cleared the house and allowed her to come out, she learned that the killer had escaped. He'd vanished through the backyard, leaving behind only a gun and the destruction of her family. "Mrs. Morgan, I'm Detective Karen Phillips. I know this is difficult, but we need to ask you some questions." Detective Phillips was a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice, but Salma could see the suspicion lurking beneath her compassion. She'd seen enough crime scenes to know that spouses were always the first suspects. "The man who did this," Salma said, adjusting James on her hip as he buried his face against her shoulder. "He was looking for files. Something about Geneva. My husband said something about Geneva before he died." "What exactly did your husband say?" "I couldn't understand most of it. He was bleeding, dying." She wiped her eyes with her free hand. "He said something about Geneva and papers, and then he said protect James." Detective Phillips exchanged a glance with her partner, Detective Rivera, a slim Latino man who'd been photographing the crime scene. "Mrs. Morgan, what do you know about your husband's work?" "He's a financial consultant. He helps small businesses manage their investments and plan for growth." The words felt strange in her mouth, describing Thomas in past tense. "He's worked with dozens of companies over the past 5 years." "Any international clients?" Some. Thomas said that international markets offered better opportunities for his clients. Salma frowned. Why? What does this have to do with what happened? The detectives exchanged another look that made her stomach clench. Mrs. Morgan, we're going to need to search your husband's office. There may be information there that can help us understand why this happened. As crime scene technicians processed her home and detectives questioned her neighbors, Salma sat on her front porch holding James, watching her life transform into something unrecognizable. The house where she and Thomas had planned to raise their family was now a crime scene. The anniversary celebration they'd been enjoying just hours ago was evidence in a murder investigation. But the worst part was the growing sense that she hadn't really known her husband at all. Mrs. Morgan. A young police officer approached with a manila envelope. We found this in your husband's car. It's addressed to you. Inside the envelope was a letter in Thomas's handwriting, dated 3 days earlier. My dearest Salma, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me. I pray that you and James are safe, but if my fears are correct, you may be in danger too. I've discovered something terrible about one of my clients. What I thought was legitimate international investment was actually money laundering for a criminal organization called Geneva International Holdings. When I tried to withdraw from their business, they threatened our family. I've been gathering evidence to turn them into the FBI, but I don't know who I can trust. There are files hidden in our home that prove everything. Find them, but be careful who you give them to. I love you and James more than life itself. Whatever happens, keep our son safe. Forever yours, Thomas. Salma read the letter twice, her hands shaking. Her husband hadn't been the victim of a random crime. He'd been murdered to silence him. And the killer had been looking for evidence that could expose Geneva International Holdings. Detective Phillips, she called out, holding up the letter. You need to see this. As the detective read Thomas's final message, Salma saw her expression grow increasingly grim. Mrs. Morgan, I need to ask you directly. Do you know where these files might be hidden? No. Thomas never told me about any of this. And you've never heard of Geneva International Holdings? Never. Detective Phillips folded the letter carefully. Mrs. Morgan, if your husband was involved in exposing a money laundering operation, you and your son could still be in danger. The people who killed Thomas may come back looking for those files. The implications hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't just a widow trying to process her grief. She was a target. Her 18-month-old son was a target. What am I supposed to do? We're going to assign protection detail to you and your son while we investigate. In the meantime, you need to think carefully about anywhere your husband might have hidden important documents. His office, safety deposit boxes, anywhere he might have thought they'd be secure. As the police finished processing the scene and prepared to seal off her home, Salma stood in the doorway holding James, looking at the place where she'd been happiest. The anniversary dinner they'd planned for weeks, the quiet evening they'd been looking forward to, the simple joy of being a family, it was all gone, destroyed by secrets she'd never known existed. But as she watched the detectives work, she noticed something that chilled her. Detective Rivera was photographing Thomas's body from multiple angles, but he seemed particularly interested in Thomas's hands. And when he thought no one was looking, he slipped something small into his pocket. Detective Phillips, Salma said quietly, can I trust you? The older woman looked at her with surprise. Of course. Why would you ask that? My husband's letter said he didn't know who he could trust. If Geneva International has enough power to threaten families and commit murder, how do I know they don't have people in the police department too? Detective Phillips was quiet for a long moment, studying Salma's face. You're right to be careful. But Mrs. Morgan, you're going to have to trust someone if you want to find justice for your husband. As they drove away from the crime scene, Salma in the backseat of a police cruiser with James sleeping in her arms, she made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find those files. Not just to help the police solve Thomas's murder, but to understand who her husband really was and what he'd died protecting. She owed him that much. She owed their son that much. But as the city lights blurred past the window and James stirred in his sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger was just beginning. The killer had escaped, the files were still hidden somewhere, and she was now the only person who might be able to expose Geneva International Holdings. The people who had murdered her husband wouldn't hesitate to come after her and James if they thought she posed a threat. Which meant she had to become more dangerous to them than they were to her. The scared young mother holding her sleeping son was already beginning to transform into someone harder. Someone who understood that sometimes justice required taking risks that could destroy everything you had left. But looking down at James's peaceful face, she knew she would take any risk necessary to protect him and honor Thomas's memory. The real fight was just beginning. The safe house was a modest ranch home in Decatur, indistinguishable from the dozen other houses on the quiet suburban street. Detective Phillips had assured Salma it was temporary, just until they could assess the full scope of the threat against her family. But as she sat on the unfamiliar couch, watching James crawl across carpet that smelled like industrial cleaning solution, temporary felt like forever. The protection detail will change shifts every 8 hours, Detective Phillips explained, checking the locks on the windows. Officer Bennett will be your primary contact during the day shift. Officer Bennett was a young white woman with sharp eyes and the kind of hyper-alert posture that suggested military training. She'd introduced herself with a firm handshake and immediately begun cataloging every potential security weakness in the house. "We'll need you to avoid any predictable routines," Bennett said. "No regular grocery shopping, no scheduled appointments, no contact with friends or family unless it's cleared through us first." The restrictions felt like prison rules, but Salma nodded understanding. James's safety was the only thing that mattered now. That first night, after Bennett had settled into the kitchen with her radio and laptop, Salma lay awake in the strange bedroom thinking about Thomas. Not the man who'd been murdered in their living room, but the Thomas she'd fallen in love with 4 years ago. She'd been working as a junior accountant at a non-profit housing organization when he'd walked into her office to discuss their investment portfolio. He was handsome in an understated way, tall and lean with kind brown eyes and a smile that made her forget whatever she'd been worried about. What had impressed her wasn't his looks, though, but the way he'd listened to her ideas about maximizing their returns while staying true to their mission. "Most financial advisors want to talk about quarterly reports," he'd said after their first meeting. "You want to talk about changing lives. I like that." Their courtship had been a whirlwind of shared values and complementary dreams. Thomas believed in using money as a tool for social good, while Salma had the analytical skills to identify the best opportunities. He'd proposed on the steps of the Martin Luther King Jr. Center, promising her a life dedicated to making the world better for families like the one they planned to build together. Now, holding James as he slept fitfully in the unfamiliar crib, she wondered how much of that man had been real and how much had been a carefully constructed facade. The next morning brought Dr. Amanda Rhodes, a child psychologist who specialized in trauma cases. She was a petite woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of gentle authority that immediately put James at ease. "Children his age are remarkably resilient," Dr. Rhodes assured Salma as James played with blocks on the living room floor. "The key is maintaining as much normalcy as possible while he processes what he's experienced." "What did he experience?" "I mean, he was hidden in the closet during." Salma couldn't finish the sentence. "He heard violence. He sensed your terror. He knows his father is gone, even if he can't articulate it." Dr. Rhodes watched James stack blocks with intense concentration. "Children absorb everything, even what we think we're protecting them from." It was during Dr. Rhodes's second visit that Salma met Noah Blackwood, Thomas's business partner. She'd heard his name mentioned but had never met him in person. He was younger than Thomas, maybe 35, with the kind of polished confidence that came from old money and Ivy League education. "Salma, I'm so sorry for your loss," Noah said, accepting Dr. Rhodes's offer of coffee. "Thomas was like a brother to me. I still can't believe he's gone." "Did you know about Geneva International Holdings?" Noah's expression grew carefully neutral. "I knew Thomas was concerned about one of our clients. He'd been asking questions about their funding sources, wanted to review their documentation more thoroughly." "Why didn't you tell the police this?" "I did. Detective Rivera took my statement yesterday." Noah leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Salma, there's something you need to know. Thomas didn't just stumble onto Geneva International's crimes. He'd been investigating them for months." The revelation hit her like cold water. "What do you mean?" "He suspected they were using our firm to launder money, but he needed proof before he could act. He was gathering evidence, building a case." Noah's eyes were pained. "I begged him to just drop them as clients and walk away, but he said too many people were being hurt. He felt responsible." "Responsible for what?" "The money Geneva International was laundering wasn't just from financial crimes. They were funding human trafficking operations across the Southeast." Noah's voice was barely above a whisper. "Thomas found evidence that they were selling women and children, using our investment advice to move the profits offshore." Salma felt sick. Her husband hadn't just discovered money laundering, he'd uncovered a human trafficking ring. The scope of the danger they were facing suddenly became much clearer. Noah, where are the files Thomas was gathering? The police searched his office, but they didn't find anything. That's because he didn't keep them at the office. Thomas was paranoid about Geneva International having connections inside law enforcement. Noah glanced toward the kitchen where Officer Bennett was monitoring radio chatter. He said he'd hidden the evidence somewhere safe, somewhere only you would think to look. That afternoon, while James napped and Officer Bennett took a call outside, Salma found herself alone with Dr. Rhodes. The psychologist had been watching her carefully throughout Noah's visit, and now she broached a subject that made Salma's stomach clench. How are you processing your own trauma, Salma? I'm fine. I just need to focus on keeping James safe. Witnessing your husband's murder, being threatened by his killer, discovering that your life wasn't what you thought it was, these are massive psychological shocks. Dr. Rhodes's voice was gentle but insistent. You can't protect your son effectively if you don't take care of yourself. I don't have time to fall apart. I'm not suggesting you fall apart. I'm suggesting you acknowledge what you've lost and what you're feeling about it. Dr. Rhodes leaned forward. Salma, it's okay to be angry. It's okay to feel betrayed by Thomas for keeping secrets. It's okay to be terrified about what comes next. The permission to feel hit unexpectedly hard. For 3 days, she'd been focused entirely on logistics, safety protocols, police interviews, protecting James. She hadn't allowed herself to grieve, to rage, to process the fact that the man she'd loved and trusted had been living a double life. He lied to me, she whispered, surprising herself. For months, maybe longer, he was investigating criminals and he never told me. He put our family in danger and I didn't even know it. And how does that make you feel? Furious, betrayed, terrified. The words came out in a rush. But also, proud. He was trying to save people. He died trying to protect victims of trafficking. Dr. Rhodes nodded. Love and anger can coexist. You can grieve the man you lost while also feeling betrayed by the secrets he kept. That evening, after James was asleep and Officer Bennett was settling in for the night shift, Salma began searching through the personal belongings they'd been allowed to bring from the house. If Thomas had hidden evidence somewhere only she would think to look, it had to be connected to their shared memories, their private jokes, their intimate moments. She was looking through photo albums when she found it, a USB drive taped to the inside back cover of their wedding album, hidden behind their favorite photo from their honeymoon in Charleston. The drive contained dozens of files, bank records, wire transfer receipts, encrypted communications, and photographs. As she scrolled through the evidence Thomas had gathered, the full scope of Geneva International's operation became clear. They weren't just laundering money from trafficking. They were running a sophisticated network that moved women and children across state lines, selling them to buyers who paid premium prices for victims who fit specific criteria. The financial transactions Thomas had traced showed millions of dollars flowing through seemingly legitimate businesses, all connected back to Geneva International Holdings. But the most shocking discovery was a list of names at the bottom of one document, current and former law enforcement officers who were on Geneva International's payroll. The list included Detective Rivera. Salma stared at the screen, her hands shaking. Detective Rivera had been at the crime scene. He'd been photographing Thomas's body, taking evidence, asking questions about the missing files. He'd also been working for the people who had killed her husband. A sound from the kitchen made her freeze. Officer Bennett was supposed to be monitoring the radios, but Salma could hear her talking quietly on the phone. She found something. I can tell by the way she's acting. There was a pause. No, she hasn't said anything directly, but she's been going through their personal items all evening. Salma quietly closed the laptop and slipped the USB drive into her pocket. Officer Bennett wasn't just protection. She was surveillance, reporting Salma's activities back to someone else. The betrayal cut deep, not just because Bennett had seemed trustworthy, but because it meant Geneva International's reach extended even into the police department's protection detail. There was no one she could trust, no way she was truly safe. As she crept back to the bedroom where James slept peacefully in his crib, Salma realized that her situation was far more dangerous than anyone had told her. She wasn't just a widow being protected while police investigated her husband's murder. She was a target being monitored by the very people who were supposed to keep her safe. The evidence Thomas had died to gather was now in her possession, but she couldn't turn it over to the police without knowing who else was working for Geneva International. She couldn't stay in the safe house knowing that Officer Bennett was reporting her every move. And she couldn't run without putting James at even greater risk. But looking at her sleeping son, remembering Thomas's final words, "Protect James." She knew what she had to do. She had to become someone the killers didn't expect. Not a grieving widow waiting for rescue, but a woman determined to finish what her husband had started and protect her child at any cost. The scared young mother was disappearing, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes protecting the people you love means becoming dangerous to the people who threaten them. Tomorrow, she would begin planning her escape from the safe house and the people who were supposed to protect her. She would find a way to expose Geneva International Holdings and honor Thomas's sacrifice. But tonight, she would hold her son and grieve for the life they'd lost, the husband she'd loved, and the innocence that had died along with him. The real fight was just beginning, and she was the only one who could win it. Salma waited until 3 a.m. before making her move. Officer Bennett had fallen asleep in the kitchen chair, her radio crackling softly with routine check-ins. James was sleeping deeply in his portable crib, exhausted from the stress of the past few days. Moving silently, Salma packed only essentials, diapers, formula, a few changes of clothes for both of them, and the USB drive containing Thomas's evidence. She left everything else behind, including her cell phone, which could be tracked. The back door opened without a sound. She'd been watching Bennett's routine for 3 days and knew the officer only checked the rear perimeter every 2 hours. That gave her a narrow window to escape. With James sleeping in her arms and a diaper bag slung over her shoulder, she slipped through the backyard and into the alley behind the safe house. A taxi was waiting 3 blocks away. She'd called from the landline while Bennett was in the bathroom, using cash she'd hidden in James's diaper bag. "Airport," she told the driver, then changed her mind. No, the Greyhound station. They would expect her to fly somewhere, to use credit cards or try to contact family. But Salma had learned from Thomas's paranoia. Cash transactions, public transportation, and staying invisible were her only advantages now. At the bus station, she bought tickets to Birmingham under a false name, using her late grandmother's maiden name and James's middle name. It wasn't sophisticated, but it would buy her time to figure out her next move. During the 3-hour bus ride, James slept fitfully in her lap while she reviewed everything she knew. Geneva International had killed Thomas to silence him. They had people inside the police department. They were monitoring her through Officer Bennett. And somewhere in the evidence Thomas had gathered was information valuable enough to justify murdering a father and threatening his family. But she also had advantages they didn't know about. Noah Blackwood had given her insight into Thomas's investigation. Dr. Rhodes had helped her understand her own psychological state. And most importantly, they thought she was a helpless widow waiting for rescue, not a woman planning to fight back. In Birmingham, she checked into a budget motel under another false name, paying cash for 3 nights. James was cranky and confused, sensing his mother's tension, but she managed to get him fed and settled before opening Thomas's files on the motel's ancient laptop. What she found changed everything. Thomas hadn't just been investigating Geneva International. He'd been working with someone inside the FBI. Agent Claire Morrison had been his contact, and according to the encrypted messages Salma found, she was still alive and still investigating. But the last message from Agent Morrison, sent just 2 days before Thomas's death, carried a warning that made Salma's blood run cold. "They know about our investigation. Don't trust local police. Don't trust anyone except the emergency contact I gave you." The emergency contact was a phone number with no name attached. Salma stared at the number, debating whether to call. It could be a trap. Geneva International could have tortured the information out of Agent Morrison. But it could also be her only chance to find someone who understood the scope of what Thomas had uncovered. She dialed from the motel's payphone. "Rose's Diner," answered a woman with a thick southern accent. "I'm calling about the special investigation," Salma said, using the code phrase from Thomas's notes. There was a long pause. "Who is this?" "Thomas Morgan's wife. He's dead, and I have his files." "Jesus Christ. Are you safe?" "For now. But they had someone monitoring me at the safe house." "Listen carefully. There's a truck stop off I-85, exit 42. Be there tomorrow at noon. Come alone, and bring everything Thomas gathered. Don't trust anyone in law enforcement until you hear from me directly." The line went dead. Salma spent the rest of the night alternating between studying Thomas's files and watching James sleep. Her son was the only innocent thing left in her world, the only person she could trust completely. Whatever happened next, she would protect him. But as dawn broke through the motel's thin curtains, she realized that protection might require doing things the old Salma would never have considered. The woman who had fallen in love with Thomas's idealism was gone, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes justice required breaking rules and taking risks. The next morning, she took a taxi to the truck stop, leaving James with the motel owner's teenage daughter, who was happy to babysit for $50 cash. It was a calculated risk, but she couldn't bring her son to a meeting that might be a trap. The truck stop was busy with morning traffic, drivers grabbing coffee and breakfast before hitting the road. Salma found a booth in the back corner and waited, the USB drive hidden in her jacket pocket. At exactly noon, a woman in her 40s approached her table. She was tall and athletic with short red hair and the kind of alert posture that screamed federal agent. "You're Salma Morgan." "And you are?" "Agent Claire Morrison, FBI Financial Crimes Division. I'm sorry about Thomas. He was a good man who died trying to do the right thing." Morrison slid into the booth across from her, keeping her back to the wall and her eyes on the restaurant's entrances. "Did you bring the files?" Salma pulled out the USB drive. "Everything's here. But I want to know what Thomas was really involved in before I hand this over." Morrison's expression grew grim. Geneva International Holdings is a front for one of the largest human trafficking operations in the country. They move victims across state lines, sell them to buyers who pay based on specific requests, and launder the profits through legitimate businesses. "How long has the FBI known about this?" "We've been investigating for 2 years, but they are careful. Shell companies, offshore accounts, encrypted communications. We needed someone on the inside to gather evidence we could use in court. So you recruited my husband. Thomas came to us. He suspected what Geneva International was doing and wanted to help stop it." Morrison leaned forward. "Mrs. Morgan, the evidence on that drive could bring down their entire operation. But it could also get you killed. They already want me dead." "Not necessarily. Right now, you're a widow who might know something dangerous. If you turn over this evidence and testify against them, you become the primary witness in a federal case against people who've killed to protect their secrets." The implications were clear. Testifying meant putting herself and James in permanent danger from people with unlimited resources and no moral constraints. "What are my alternatives?" "Disappear. Take your son and start over somewhere Geneva International can't find you. The FBI will do what we can with the evidence, but without Thomas's testimony, it'll be much harder to get convictions." It was the safe choice, the smart choice. Take James and run. Let someone else fight the battle Thomas had died for. But as she sat in that truck stop diner, holding evidence that could save dozens of trafficking victims, Salma realized she couldn't walk away. Thomas had died believing that justice was worth the risk. If she ran now, his death would be meaningless. "I'll testify." Morrison's expression was both relieved and concerned. "Mrs. Morgan, you need to understand what that means. Geneva International has killed 3 other potential witnesses in the past year. We can provide protection, but your protection is compromised. Detective Rivera is on their payroll, and the officer assigned to guard me was reporting my activities to someone." Morrison's face went pale. "We suspected local corruption, but if they've infiltrated the protection detail, then you need to get better at your job." Salma's voice was steel. "Because I'm not hiding anymore. I'm going to finish what Thomas started, and I'm going to make sure the people who killed him pay for what they've done." As she handed over the USB drive, Salma felt something shift inside her. The scared young mother was gone completely, replaced by someone who understood that some fights were worth having regardless of the cost. Geneva International had made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed that killing Thomas would end the investigation. Instead, they'd created an enemy more dangerous than any federal agent. A mother with nothing left to lose except her child and everything to gain by bringing down the people who'd destroyed her family. The real war was about to begin. 3 weeks into federal protection, Salma's life had become a carefully choreographed dance of safe houses, encrypted communications, and constant vigilance. Agent Morrison had arranged for a new identity, Helen Parker, single mother from Ohio, complete with documentation that would pass casual inspection. The current safe house was a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, isolated enough to spot approaching vehicles from miles away. James was adapting better than expected, treating their new life like an extended camping trip. But Salma could see the stress building in his clingy behavior and disrupted sleep patterns. "The grand jury will convene next week," Morrison explained during one of her twice-weekly visits. "Your testimony will be the cornerstone of our case against Geneva International." "What about Detective Rivera?" "Internal Affairs is building a case, but carefully. We don't want to spook other potential conspirators." Morrison paused. Salma, there's something else. We've identified the man who killed Thomas. The words hit her like electricity. Who is he? Miguel Santos, freelance assassin with connections to trafficking networks across the Southeast. He's killed at least 6 other witnesses in similar cases. Morrison pulled out a photograph. We have him under surveillance, but we need you to make a positive identification before we can arrest him. Looking at the photo, Salma felt the night of Thomas's murder crash back over her. The cold eyes, the casual demeanor, the way he'd spoken about her husband's death like it was a business transaction. That's him. Are you certain? You'd have to testify to that in court. I'm certain. Morrison nodded. There's one more thing. Santos didn't just escape that night. He was extracted by someone with law enforcement access. Whoever helped him has been covering his tracks ever since. The implications were chilling. Geneva International's corruption went deeper than just Detective Rivera. They had help at multiple levels of law enforcement. That evening, as James played with blocks on the cabin floor, Salma found herself watching Agent Morrison differently. The federal agent was younger than she'd initially appeared, maybe 35, with an intensity that suggested personal investment in the case beyond professional duty. Can I ask you something? Salma said as Morrison prepared to leave. Of course. Why is this case so important to you? I mean, personally important. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, staring out the cabin window at the darkening mountains. I have a younger sister. Had. She disappeared 3 years ago while backpacking through Europe. We never found her body, but... She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Geneva International's reach extended far beyond American borders. I'm sorry. The point is, this isn't just about justice for Thomas. It's about stopping people who destroy families for profit. Morrison's voice hardened. But it's also about keeping you and James alive long enough to testify. That night, Salma lay awake listening to the mountain silence, broken only by James's soft breathing in the next room. She'd been in protection for 3 weeks, but the walls felt like they were closing in. Every day brought them closer to the trial, and every day increased the likelihood that Geneva International would find them. Her phone, a secure device Morrison had provided, buzzed with an encrypted message. Package delivered to your old address. Hope you like surprises. MS. Miguel Santos knew where she used to live. He was taunting her, letting her know that he could reach anyone connected to her former life. Salma immediately called Morrison, who arrived at the cabin within an hour, her face grim. We checked your old house. Santos left a package containing photos of you and James from the past 2 weeks. He's been watching you. The violation felt like a physical assault. Despite all their precautions, Santos had been close enough to photograph them, to study their routines, to plan their deaths. How is that possible? We're checking for leaks in the protection detail, but it's also possible he's just that good at surveillance. Morrison's expression was apologetic but determined. We're moving you again. Tonight. As they packed quickly, James crying from confusion and exhaustion, Salma felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. They'd been running for weeks, jumping from safe house to safe house, and Santos was still getting closer. What if we never stop running? She asked Morrison as they loaded into an unmarked SUV. Then we make sure the running matters. Your testimony can end this. The new safe house was a downtown Atlanta apartment, surrounded by busy streets and constant activity that would make surveillance more difficult. But it also meant they were back in the city where Thomas had died, where Geneva International's influence was strongest. On their second night in the apartment, Salma discovered something that changed everything. While Morrison was putting James to bed, she noticed an unusual reflection in the kitchen window, a small device attached to the fire escape outside. A listening device. Someone was monitoring their conversations. She didn't tell Morrison immediately. Instead, she waited until the agent left, then carefully examined the device. It was sophisticated, military-grade equipment that would have required significant resources and expertise to install. The betrayal hit her like ice water. Either Morrison was compromised, or someone else in the FBI was feeding information to Geneva International. Either way, their location was known, their conversations were being monitored, and their safety was an illusion. That night, as she lay in the strange apartment listening to the city sounds outside, Salma made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't trust the FBI's protection. She couldn't trust their safe houses. She couldn't even trust Morrison, despite the agent's apparent dedication to the case. She was going to take James and disappear on her own terms. But first, she was going to give Geneva International something they weren't expecting, a target they couldn't ignore and couldn't silence. She was going to find Miguel Santos herself. The scared young mother was gone completely now, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes protecting your child means putting yourself in maximum danger. Someone who would use herself as bait to draw out the killers, then make sure they never threatened another family. The real hunt was about to begin, and this time, she would be the predator instead of the prey. Salma spent 2 days planning her escape from federal protection, studying Morrison's routines and identifying the surveillance gaps. But on the third morning, everything changed when she overheard a phone conversation that shattered her remaining trust. Morrison was in the kitchen making coffee, speaking quietly into her secure phone. The timelines accelerated. "We need to move tonight." Salma pressed herself against the bedroom wall, straining to hear. "I know the risks, but she's becoming too independent. If she goes rogue before the trial." Morrison paused. "No, she trusts me completely. She has no idea." A chill ran down Salma's spine. Morrison wasn't talking about protecting her. She was talking about controlling her. "The boy is the key. As long as we have him, she'll do exactly what we need her to do." James. They were planning to use her son as leverage. "Don't worry about Santos. He's following orders perfectly. The threatening messages, the surveillance photos, it's all designed to keep her dependent on our protection." The words hit Salma like a physical blow. Miguel Santos wasn't hunting her independently. He was working with the FBI to terrorize her into compliance. Everything she'd been running from was orchestrated manipulation. By tomorrow night, she'll be in protective custody at the federal facility. Complete isolation until after she testifies. And if she refuses to cooperate. Morrison's voice turned cold. "Well, accidents happen even in federal protection." Salma backed away from the wall, her mind reeling. Morrison wasn't trying to help her bring down Geneva International. She was part of it. The FBI agent who'd claimed to care about trafficking victims, who'd shared the story about her missing sister, who'd promised to keep James safe. All lies. But the betrayal went deeper than that. As she processed what she'd overheard, other pieces fell into place. Morrison had been the one to suggest the mountain cabin where Santos somehow photographed them. Morrison had chosen the Atlanta apartment where listening devices appeared overnight. Morrison had controlled every aspect of their protection, ensuring they were always vulnerable to exactly the right threats at the right moments. Thomas hadn't been killed by Geneva International alone. He'd been killed by a conspiracy that included the very federal agents he'd trusted to help him. In the next room, James was playing quietly with his blocks, oblivious to the danger surrounding him. In a few hours, Morrison would move them to a federal facility where Salma would disappear forever and James would become an orphan raised by the people who'd murdered his father. She had to run. Now, moving silently, she packed only essentials, formula, diapers, the spare cash she'd been hiding, and a burner phone she'd bought secretly during one of their supervised trips to the grocery store. She left everything else, including the secure phone Morrison had given her. The apartment had a service elevator that accessed the parking garage. Morrison was still on her call, believing Salma was napping with James. It was the perfect window. With James in her arms and a diaper bag over her shoulder, she slipped out of the apartment and took the service elevator to the garage. Her heart hammered as she found an unlocked maintenance door that led to the alley behind the building. For the first time in weeks, she was truly alone with her son, with no protection except her own intelligence and determination. But as she emerged into the Atlanta afternoon, she realized the full scope of her isolation. She couldn't trust law enforcement. They were compromised at multiple levels. She couldn't contact friends or family. Geneva International would be monitoring them. She couldn't use credit cards or her real identity. Too easy to track. She was a woman alone with an 18-month-old child, running from people with unlimited resources and connections throughout the legal system. But she also had advantages they didn't know about. The USB drive with Thomas's original files was hidden in James's diaper bag. Morrison thought she'd handed over everything, but Salma had made copies. She had cash. And most importantly, she had motivation stronger than fear. They'd threatened her son. That made them more dangerous to her than she was to them. Her first call was to Noah Blackwood, Thomas's business partner. If anyone could help her disappear while she figured out her next move, it would be someone who understood Geneva International's reach but wasn't part of the federal investigation. "Salma? Jesus, where are you? The FBI said you were in protective custody." "The FBI is compromised." "Noah, I need help. I have James and nowhere safe to go. There was a pause. Where are you right now? Downtown Atlanta. I can't say more over the phone. Meet me at the old warehouse district, building 47. It's abandoned but secure. I'll be there in an hour. As she waited in the shadow of the abandoned warehouse, James sleeping in her arms, Salma felt the weight of complete isolation settling over her. Everyone she'd trusted had betrayed her. Every system designed to protect her had been turned against her. But when Noah arrived, the relief on his face seemed genuine. Thank God you're safe. When Morrison called looking for you, I knew something was wrong. Morrison called you. An hour ago. She said you'd run from protection and might try to contact Thomas's friends and family. Noah's expression darkened. She wanted me to call her immediately if you reached out. The trap was already closing. Morrison knew she'd run and was moving to cut off her potential allies. Noah, I need you to listen carefully. Morrison is working for Geneva International. The FBI protection was a lie designed to control me until I testified, then make me disappear. Noah stared at her for a long moment, then his shoulders sagged. I was afraid of this. What do you mean? Thomas suspected federal law enforcement was compromised. That's why he was so paranoid in his final weeks. Noah looked around the empty warehouse. But Salma, if Morrison is dirty, then you're in more danger than you realize. She knows everything, your habits, your fears, the people you trust. As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the warehouse district. Multiple engines, moving fast and with purpose. Morrison had found them. There's a back exit, Noah said urgently. But Salma, you need to understand something. If you keep running, they'll never stop hunting you. The only way this ends is if you find a way to expose the entire conspiracy. How am I supposed to do that when I can't trust anyone? By being smarter than they think you are. Noah pressed a set of car keys into her hand. Blue Honda, parked 2 blocks north. It's registered to a shell company, untraceable to either of us. As the sound of engines grew closer, Noah made a decision that would haunt Salma forever. I'm going to buy you time. Tell them I haven't seen you. They'll know you're lying. Maybe. But it'll give you a head start. Noah's smile was sad but determined. Finish what Thomas started. Make sure his death meant something. The last thing Salma saw as she slipped out the back exit was Noah walking toward the front of the warehouse, hands raised in surrender, buying her precious minutes with his own safety. As she strapped James into the Honda's backseat and drove into the Atlanta night, she realized she'd lost everything except her son and her determination to expose the truth. But sometimes, that was enough. The hunt had become personal. Geneva International had killed her husband, corrupted the systems meant to protect her, and now threatened the only family she had left. They'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed that isolating her would make her weak. Instead, it had made her deadly. The motel room in Macon was a dive that rented by the hour and asked no questions. Salma paid cash for 3 nights, registered as Helen Parker, and tried to convince herself that the stains on the carpet were just wear from years of use. James was feverish and cranky, sensing his mother's desperation even if he couldn't understand it. She'd been giving him children's Tylenol from a gas station pharmacy, but his temperature was climbing and he needed real medical attention. Which was impossible. Hospitals required identification, insurance, records that would lead Morrison straight to them. For 18 hours, they'd been truly alone. The burner phone had been silent except for news alerts that made her stomach clench. Noah Blackwood's body had been found in the warehouse, apparent suicide by gunshot. The FBI statement expressed regret over the death of a key witness in their ongoing investigation. They'd killed him. The man who'd tried to help her escape, who'd bought her time with his own life, was gone. Another death on her conscience, another life lost because of the evidence Thomas had died protecting. The burner phone buzzed with an unknown number. Mrs. Morgan. The voice was Miguel Santos, calm and conversational. You've been very busy. Her blood turned to ice. How did you get this number? I got it the same way I got your location, your car description, and the knowledge that your son needs medical attention. Santos's voice carried casual menace. Motels have security cameras. Gas stations have security cameras. Pharmacies have security cameras. You can run, but you can't hide. Through the motel window, she could see the parking lot. Empty except for her Honda and 2 other cars. But Santos could be anywhere, the room across the hall, the building next door, watching through a scope from a distance. What do you want? The same thing I've always wanted. Thomas's files. All of them, including the copies you think we don't know about. I already gave everything to the FBI. Santos laughed. Mrs. Morgan, Agent Morrison works for me. She always has. The entire federal investigation was designed to gather Thomas's evidence and identify anyone else who might know about Geneva International. The words hit her like hammer blows. Morrison hadn't been corrupted by Geneva International. She'd been working for them from the beginning. Thomas had handed his evidence directly to the enemy. Your husband was a good man with terrible judgment about who to trust, Santos continued. But his mistake doesn't have to be fatal for you and your son. What are you offering? James gets medical attention at a private clinic, no questions asked. You disappear to a country that doesn't extradite to the United States. New identities, enough money to live comfortably. Santos paused. All I need is the remaining evidence and your promise to never speak about Geneva International again. It was everything she'd wanted since the nightmare began. Safety for James, escape from the people hunting them, a chance to rebuild their lives somewhere far from the corruption and violence. All she had to do was let Thomas's killers go free. You have 1 hour to decide, Santos said. After that, the offer expires and we handle this the hard way. The line went dead. Salma looked at James, who was burning with fever in the motel's sagging bed. His breathing was labored, his skin flushed and hot. He needed a doctor, needed medicine, needed care she couldn't provide while running from trained killers. The moral choice was clear. Her son's life was more important than justice for Thomas. James was innocent, had done nothing to deserve being caught in this nightmare. She could save him by accepting Santos's offer. But as she held her fevering child, she thought about the trafficking victims Thomas had died trying to save. Women and children being sold like property, their lives destroyed for profit. If she took Santos's deal, Geneva International would continue operating, continue destroying families, continue killing anyone who threatened their business. How many other sons would lose their fathers? How many other wives would watch their husbands die? The burner phone rang again. Different number. Salma, it's Dr. Rhodes. The child psychologist's voice was urgent. Don't hang up. I know you think you can't trust anyone, but I'm not who you think I am. How did you get this number? Because I've been tracking Geneva International for 3 years. I'm DEA, undercover. Dr. Rhodes is my cover identity. Another federal agent. Another person claiming to help while working for the enemy. You're lying. Your husband contacted the DEA 6 months before he died. Agent Morrison told you he was working with the FBI, but that was a lie. Thomas was our asset, and we've been trying to bring down Geneva International's drug trafficking operation. Prove it. Thomas's code name was Phoenix. His handler was Agent Julia Chen. The emergency contact number he gave you was mine. Dr. Rhodes's voice was rapid, desperate. Salma, Morrison is Geneva International's inside person. She's been feeding them information about our investigation. The details matched what Salma had discovered, but she couldn't afford to trust anyone claiming to be law enforcement. What do you want? I want to save your son and finish what Thomas started. There's a pediatric clinic 15 minutes from your location. Dr. Amanda Richards, she's with us. She can treat James without reporting his location. Another choice. Trust another federal agent who might be lying, or watch her son's condition worsen while she tried to handle everything alone. Salma, listen to me. Santos isn't just offering you escape, he's lying. Geneva International doesn't let witnesses live, even ones who take deals. The moment you hand over that evidence, you and James become liabilities. The words rang true. Santos had killed Thomas despite his cooperation. He'd killed Noah despite his surrender. Why would he honor a deal with her? Where's the clinic? Dr. Rhodes gave her an address. Come alone. Bring James and the evidence. We'll protect you both while we finish the investigation. As Salma prepared to leave the motel room, she realized she was making the same choice that had gotten Thomas killed, trusting federal agents who claimed to be fighting the same enemy. But looking at James's fevered face, she knew she had no alternative. Her son needed medical attention, and she couldn't provide it alone. She was walking into another trap, but it was the only way to save the person who mattered most. The drive to the clinic took 20 minutes through empty streets. With every mile, she expected Santos to appear, expected the trap to spring. Instead, she found a small pediatric practice in a quiet neighborhood, lights on despite the late hour. Dr. Richards was waiting, a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes and gentle hands who immediately began examining James. Respiratory infection, but treatable. Dr. Richards said after checking his temperature and listening to his breathing. We'll start antibiotics and monitor his fever. As Dr. Richards worked, Dr. Rhodes appeared from a back room, looking nothing like the child psychologist Salma remembered. Gone was the gentle demeanor, replaced by the sharp focus of a federal agent. We need to move fast, Dr. Rhodes said. Santos knows you're here. How? Because Morrison told him. Dr. Rhodes's expression was grim. She's been tracking you through facial recognition software at traffic cameras. Every move you've made, every location you've visited, they've known about it within hours. The hopelessness of her situation crashed over her. She couldn't run far enough, hide deep enough, or trust anyone completely. Geneva International's reach was too vast, their resources too extensive. What's the point? She whispered. Even if we expose them, they'll just disappear and start over somewhere else. Dr. Rhodes knelt beside her chair, her voice gentle but urgent. The point is that some fights are worth having even when you can't win. Thomas understood that. He died believing that stopping Geneva International, even temporarily, would save lives. As James slept under Dr. Richards's care, his fever finally breaking, Salma made her final choice. She handed over the USB drive containing all of Thomas's evidence. Use it, she said. End this. But even as she spoke the words, she could hear vehicles approaching outside. Santos had found them. The calm before the storm was over. The final battle was about to begin. The vehicles outside weren't law enforcement. They were black SUVs with tinted windows, the kind Santos preferred for operations that required discretion. 3 of them, engines running, positioned to block every exit from the clinic. Back door, Dr. Rhodes said urgently, grabbing James from Dr. Richards's examination table. There's an alley behind the building. But as they moved toward the rear exit, more vehicles appeared, boxing them in completely. Santos had learned from her previous escapes. This time, there would be no way out. Dr. Rhodes, Salma said quietly. How did Santos find us so quickly? The DEA agent avoided her eyes. Traffic cameras, like I said. No. Salma's voice was steel. You called him. Dr. Rhodes stopped moving, her shoulders sagging in defeat. When she turned around, the gentle psychologist and fierce federal agent were both gone, replaced by something tired and resigned. Geneva International has my daughter, she said simply. They've had her for 6 months. Every time I think about betraying them, they send me photos of what they'll do to her. Another betrayal. Another person claiming to help while working for the enemy. But this time, Salma felt something different, not shock or anger, but cold clarity. How old is she? 7. Her name is Lily. Dr. Rhodes's voice broke. They took her from her school playground. Said they'd return her safely if I cooperated with their operations. Salma looked at James, sleeping peacefully despite the danger surrounding them, and understood exactly what Dr. Rhodes was feeling. The desperate love of a mother, the willingness to sacrifice anything to protect your child. They are lying, she said gently. They don't return children. They sell them. Dr. Rhodes's face crumpled. I know, but hope is all I have left. The front door of the clinic opened, and Miguel Santos walked in alone, hands empty but confident. He looked exactly as Salma remembered, cold blue eyes, casual demeanor, the kind of man who killed without losing sleep. Mrs. Morgan, you've led us quite a chase. He glanced at Dr. Rhodes. Thank you for your continued cooperation. Your daughter is well. Let me see her. Soon. Santos turned back to Salma. Now, about that evidence. Dr. Rhodes held up the USB drive with shaking hands. It's all here. Everything Thomas gathered. Santos took the drive and slipped it into his pocket. Excellent. Dr. Richards, thank you for your medical services. You can go. The pediatrician looked confused but relieved as she gathered her supplies and headed for the back exit. Santos let her leave. She'd never been part of the real game. Now, Santos said, pulling out his phone. Let me show you something interesting. The phone screen displayed a live video feed from what looked like a warehouse. In the center of the frame, a small girl sat tied to a chair, tears streaming down her face. Lily. Dr. Rhodes lunged forward, but Santos held up a warning hand. She's safe. For now. But her continued well-being depends on everyone following instructions exactly. He turned to Salma. Mrs. Morgan, you have a choice to make. I can kill you and Dr. Rhodes right now, and Lily dies alone in that warehouse. Oh. Or what? Or you call Agent Morrison and tell her you're ready to cooperate fully with the federal investigation. You testify exactly as scripted. Geneva International gets a few sacrificial lambs prosecuted while the real operation continues, and everyone lives. Including Lily. Santos smiled. Including Lily. She'll be returned to her mother once the trial concludes. It was the devil's bargain Thomas had refused to make. Cooperate with a sham investigation, let the real criminals escape justice, and trust murderers to honor their promises. But looking at the video feed of a terrified 7-year-old girl, and holding her own son in her arms, Salma understood why Dr. Rhodes had been willing to betray everything she believed in. What about James? James grows up with his mother. You disappear to somewhere safe after the trial. Everyone wins. Except the trafficking victims. Santos shrugged. They will always be victims, Mrs. Morgan. The question is whether your son and Dr. Rhodes's daughter have to be among them. The impossible choice. Save 2 innocent children by allowing a criminal enterprise to continue destroying other families, or fight for justice while sacrificing the people she loved most. In that moment, Salma realized her character arc was complete. She was no longer the scared young mother who had hidden in closets while her husband was murdered. She wasn't even the determined widow who had escaped federal protection to expose the truth. She was someone who understood that some choices transcended personal cost. Dr. Rhodes, she said quietly, I need you to take James and leave. What? Take my son and go. Get Lily back however you can. Disappear with both children and never look back. Santos frowned. Mrs. Morgan, I don't think you understand Dash. I understand perfectly. Salma's voice was calm, almost peaceful. You need me alive to testify. That gives me power over this situation. She pulled out the burner phone and dialed Agent Morrison's number. Morrison, it's Salma. I'm ready to make a deal. But instead of agreeing to Santos's terms, she said the words that would change everything. I'm at the Riverside Pediatric Clinic. Miguel Santos is here with Geneva International's evidence. If you want to arrest the man who killed my husband, come now. Santos's expression shifted from confidence to rage. What have you done? I've chosen justice over safety. Thomas died for that choice. Now I'm making it too. The sound of approaching sirens filled the night air, real law enforcement this time, not Geneva International's people. Santos raised his gun, but Salma was ready for him. The final confrontation was about to begin. The sirens weren't coming for Santos, they were already here. As red and blue lights flooded the clinic windows, Salma realized her gamble had worked. But Santos's gun was still pointed at her chest, and his finger was tightening on the trigger. You think Morrison will save you? Santos snarled. She works for us. No, Salma said quietly. She doesn't. Dr. Rhodes stared at her in confusion. What are you talking about? Morrison is Geneva International's inside person. That's what Santos wanted me to believe. What he wanted all of us to believe. Salma shifted James to her other arm, keeping her voice calm despite the weapon trained on her. But I figured it out 3 days ago. Santos's expression flickered with the first hint of uncertainty. When you sent those threatening messages to my burner phone, Miguel, you made a mistake. You said Morrison had given you my location and number. But Morrison never knew about that phone. The pieces were falling into place, and Salma could see the moment Santos realized his deception was unraveling. Dr. Rhodes had access to my location through the clinic. Dr. Rhodes knew I had a burner phone because she saw me use it. And Dr. Rhodes was the only one who could have given you that information. Dr. Rhodes backed toward the wall, her face pale. You don't understand. They have my daughter. No, they don't. Salma's voice was gentle but implacable. There is no daughter. There is no Lily. The video Santos showed us was fabricated, just like your entire identity as both a psychologist and a DEA agent. The front door burst open as FBI agents flooded the clinic, led by Agent Morrison, the real Agent Morrison, who looked nothing like the corrupt federal agent Santos had led Salma to expect. Miguel Santos, you're under arrest for the murder of Thomas Morgan and conspiracy to commit human trafficking. Santos spun toward the agents, his gun no longer trained on Salma. In that moment of distraction, she did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She stepped forward. Miguel, look at me. Santos turned back, confusion replacing rage on his face. My husband died trying to save people you were hurting. Dr. Rhodes betrayed everything she claimed to believe in for money. But me. Salma's voice carried a strength that filled the room. I chose to trust the one person who never lied to me. Morrison is corrupt. Morrison is the agent my husband was really working with. The one who's been investigating Geneva International for 2 years. The one who let me think she was compromised so I could lead you into this trap. Santos's face went white as he realized the scope of his mistake. He'd been so focused on isolating Salma from potential allies that he'd driven her directly into the arms of the one person who could actually help her. The USB drive, he said desperately. I have all the evidence. Morrison smiled. You have a decoy. The real evidence has been in federal custody for weeks. Dr. Rhodes, whose real name was Victoria Hartman, a Geneva International operative who'd infiltrated multiple law enforcement agencies over the past 3 years, lunged for the back exit. But more agents were waiting. As Santos was handcuffed and Dr. Rhodes was taken into custody, Agent Morrison approached Salma with an expression of profound respect. Mrs. Morgan, when you called tonight, you said you were ready to make a deal. What kind of deal? The same one Thomas made. Full cooperation in exchange for justice. Salma looked down at James, who was sleeping peacefully despite the chaos around him. But I want guarantees. Real protection, not the fake safe houses Santos was monitoring. And I want to know that Geneva International's entire network will be dismantled, not just the expendable pieces. Morrison nodded. We've been building cases against 17 different cells across 6 states. Your husband's evidence was the keystone that made it all possible. But Salma. Yes. You need to know that this was never about protecting you from Santos. This was about letting Santos think he was winning while we gathered intelligence on Geneva International's complete operational structure. The final revelation hit her like sunrise after the darkest night. She hadn't been running from Santos. She'd been leading him exactly where law enforcement needed him to go. Every escape, every betrayal, every moment of terror had been part of a larger plan to expose the entire criminal network. Thomas knew, she said suddenly. His last words weren't a warning. They were instructions. Geneva, trust no one. He was telling me to let Geneva International's people reveal themselves by pretending I couldn't trust anyone. Morrison's smile was sad but proud. Your husband spent months learning how to think like them. He knew that the only way to catch every conspirator was to make them think they were winning. As the FBI agents processed the crime scene and prepared to transport the prisoners, Salma stood in the clinic doorway holding James, watching the sun rise over Atlanta. The nightmare was over, but the healing was just beginning. She thought about Thomas, about Noah, about all the victims Geneva International had destroyed. Their deaths hadn't been meaningless. They'd been the foundation for something larger, justice not just for individual crimes, but for an entire system of corruption and violence. The scared young mother who'd hidden in closets was gone forever. In her place stood someone who understood that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Someone who had learned that sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to risk everything for the people you'll never meet. The real victory wasn't just stopping Geneva International. It was becoming the kind of person Thomas had died believing she could be. 2 years later, Salma stood in the doorway of their old house in Brookhaven, watching 3-year-old James chase butterflies in the backyard where his father had once taught him to walk. The bullet holes had been repaired, the bloodstains removed, but she could still see the ghost of that terrible night in every familiar corner. The Geneva International trials had concluded 6 months ago with 4 to 7 convictions across multiple states. Miguel Santos received life without parole. Victoria Hartman was serving 25 years in federal prison. The trafficking network that had destroyed so many families was finally broken. But victory had come at a cost that still haunted her quiet moments. Mama, look. James pointed excitedly at a yellow butterfly that had landed on the anniversary roses she'd planted in Thomas's memory. Daddy Flower. He was too young to remember his father clearly, but somehow he understood that the garden was special, that the man in the photographs had loved this place and this family with everything he had. Agent Morrison appeared beside her, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who'd finally closed a case that had consumed years of her life. The last of the trafficking victims were repatriated yesterday, Morrison said. 43 women and children returned to their families, thanks to the evidence Thomas gathered. And the ones who can't go home. New identities, counseling, education opportunities. The Morgan Foundation is funding most of their rehabilitation. Salma had rebuilt her husband's foundation from the ground up, using the insurance settlement and asset forfeiture money from Geneva International to create something bigger than Thomas had ever imagined. Not just scholarships and community development, but a comprehensive support system for trafficking survivors. Any word on the appeals? Morrison shook her head. Santos's legal team is running out of options. He'll die in prison, which is exactly what he deserves. Through the kitchen window, Salma could see the new security system Agent Morrison had insisted on installing. Cameras, motion sensors, and a direct line to federal law enforcement. The official threat was over, but some precautions had become permanent habits. James ran toward them, his face bright with the uncomplicated joy of a child who felt safe and loved. He'd started calling Morrison Aunt Claire after her frequent visits during the trials, and the tough federal agent melted every time he hugged her legs. "Can we have cake?" he asked. "Like Daddy's day." Today marked the 4th anniversary of Thomas's death, but James had transformed it into something hopeful. Daddy's Day, when they celebrated his father's life with cake and stories and visits to the foundation that carried his name. "Of course, baby," Salma said, lifting him into her arms. "What kind should we make?" "Chocolate. With butterflies." As they moved into the kitchen where she'd once hidden in terror, Salma marveled at how completely her life had changed. The scared young mother was gone, replaced by someone who ran a national foundation, testified before Congress about trafficking legislation, and spoke at law enforcement conferences about the importance of victim protection. But the most important change was simpler. She'd learned to live with hope instead of fear. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Amanda Richards, who'd become a close friend and trusted ally. 3 more survivors ready for placement. The Chicago safe house has room. The work never ended. Geneva International was gone, but other networks continued operating. Other families faced the same nightmare hers had survived. The Morgan Foundation worked with law enforcement agencies across the country to identify victims, provide support, and prevent future crimes. "Mama," James said as she helped him mix cake batter, "tell me about Daddy." It was their ritual on these anniversaries. Stories about the father he'd lost, the man who'd died protecting strangers because he believed every life had value. "Your daddy was brave," she began, as she always did. "He saw people being hurt and decided to help them, even though it was dangerous. Like you do now. Like we do now. Together." Because that was Thomas's true legacy, not just the evidence that had brought down a criminal network, but the understanding that some fights were worth having regardless of the personal cost. That protecting the innocent was a responsibility that transcended individual safety. As the cake baked and James played with his toys, Salma found herself thinking about all the families who would sleep safely tonight because of what Thomas had started and she had finished. The trafficking victims who were rebuilding their lives. The law enforcement officers who had better tools to fight these crimes. The children who would grow up free because someone had been willing to stand up to the monsters. The anniversary dinner was simple, just Salma, James, and Agent Morrison, who'd become family during the long months of trials and recovery. They ate chocolate cake with butterfly decorations and shared stories about Thomas that made James laugh with delight. "What was Daddy's favorite color?" James asked. "Blue," Salma and Morrison said simultaneously, then smiled at the shared memory. "Like your eyes," James said solemnly. "Daddy's eyes are in heaven, but yours are here." After Morrison left and James was asleep, Salma stood in their backyard looking at the city lights beyond their fence. Somewhere out there, new victims were being trafficked, new families were being destroyed, new heroes were deciding whether to fight or stay silent. The work would continue. The foundation would grow. And James would learn, as he grew older, that his father had been someone worth remembering and emulating. She pulled out her phone and composed a message to the foundation's email list, supporters, survivors, and advocates who'd joined the fight against trafficking. 4 years ago, I lost my husband to people who believed their profits were worth more than human lives. Today, I'm proud to announce that the Morgan Foundation has helped rescue and rehabilitate over 200 trafficking survivors, funded legislation in 12 states, and trained thousands of law enforcement officers to recognize and respond to these crimes. Thomas died believing that one person could make a difference. Today, because of all of you, hundreds of people are free who might otherwise still be in chains. The fight continues, and we continue it together. As she set the message and prepared to go inside, James appeared at the back door in his pajamas, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Mama, are you coming?" "Yes, baby. I'm coming." She took one last look at the garden where Thomas's memory bloomed eternal, then turned toward the house where his son was waiting. The scared young mother was gone forever, but the woman who'd taken her place understood something more valuable than safety. Some legacies are worth any sacrifice. Some fights never end. And sometimes, the greatest victory isn't surviving the darkness, but becoming the light that guides others through it. The Morgan family's story had become bigger than their tragedy. It had become a beacon of hope for everyone who refused to let evil win. What did this story teach you about the power of choosing courage over safety when protecting the innocent? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world.